Alright, so let's move on to method 2. I just had to pause the video real quick and run over and switch our console cable to the controller number 2. So let's go back and bring up the console. Let's see if I hit enter here. It takes me to the system names, just like how we saw it earlier. As long as we don't fully go through the whole setup process, we should be able to start using the GUI. So basically switching over to our second setup. That we have currently a PC connected to port number 4. So let me bring up that PC. And method 2 is when you want to go through the setup using the GUI and you have a directly connected Ethernet to the controller. So let's bring up that setup PC right here. So first thing, let me show you that currently our LAN interface has obtained the IP from the 192.168.1 subnet, as we saw or pointed out earlier. That was part of the provisioning process of the controller, is to act as the DHCP server. So that way, when we try to set that up, it can immediately grab the IP. And just as the side note here, since we are dealing with a 2504, you pretty much have the 4 built-in Ethernet port. And depending on the software version of your controller, if you're running anything older than version 8, which is, I believe, the first version that supports 7.6, then you have to plug into port 2. But since the version 8 comes out, you can pretty much plug into any one of the port, like how we have it currently connected right now. So our PC is connected to port number 4 and it's able to obtain a DHCP and work just fine. Okay, if you have a different controller model, for example, 5508, then you'll be currently plugging into the controller service port, okay, which is the port that's on the far left of the controller. All right, so what I'm going to do now is to try to get to the GUI. Let me bring up the browser. And the IP that you're going to is 192.168.1.1, which is the default gateway of the DHCP scope. Side note here is it's not HTTPS, it's just HTTP. Okay, so you can see that once you enter that IP, it takes you to the setup page for our Cisco 2500 series wireless LAN controller. Okay, for some reason it doesn't look quite right when using IE, so let me switch over to Chrome and see if it looks any better. There you go, .1.1. This is where it's asking you to create a admin credential, just like how we did on the command line. So username admin, then password. Click start, and then it takes you to the next page, which is just a series of boxes that you need to complete. You'll see the majority of these parameters that we need to complete looks very much the same as what we went through with the command line. Starting with system name, you'll give it LM-WLC2. Country is US. See it here, we can actually manually set date and time, and it looks correct already, as well as time zone, which we did not get a chance to set up earlier. So it's kind of forcing you to do that, which is a good thing. Then NTP server, even though it said optional, again, highly recommended. Pointing to our switch loopback, which is 0.10. Management IP, and this one is on VLAN 33.104. Subnet mask /24. Gateway is 33.1. And don't forget the VLAN ID 33. Okay, make sure that looks correct. Click next. Okay, now here we have an opportunity to create 2 SSID. The first one is for employee, which is usually internal, secure, protected. We created one on the WLC one called temp WLC1. Here we're going to call it temp WLC2. Security we can leave at WPA2 personal. We're not going to worry too much right now. Passphrase, I'm just going to do Cisco 123 with capitalized C in the front. So Cisco 123. Let's map it to management VLAN. That should be good enough. Right? If you want to configure a guest network, you can pretty much do it right here as well. Just switch it over, give it a SSID, select your security, IP address, so on and so forth. All right, since we're going to be doing that manually later on, we're going to switch that back off and hit next. All right. The next section, which is under the advanced setting. So one thing is different here, instead of the controller asking you to whether or not enable or disable radios, fill out various parameters. If you remember, it's just become a simple on switch. Once you hit that, then it will ask you to choose your type of client density and traffic data. What this is the Cisco way of kind of simplifying the setup process for you, and instead of you having to manually configure different parameters for the radios, it's just asking you for a type of implementation, and then we're trying to implement series of best practices settings for you automatically. So depending on your type of implementation, then you will select this accordingly. We're just going to leave it at the default, which is typical client density and traffic type data. Okay, and later on you will see that what type of best practices settings that the controller kind of implements on your behalf, and we'll go through those and see what it looks like. Okay, so no more turning on and off the radios, or even if you remember, the multicast IP is not in there neither. As far as the virtual IP address, you can see how by default it pre-fill the box for you is 192.0.2.1, which is what we provided earlier on the command line. And this is something that you have to enter yourself, which is the name of the mobility group. So we'll type in lm-mg. Right, and there's a little question mark icon on the right. If you hover over it, then it kind of guides you to what you need to enter right here. Okay, so no more than 31 character, for example, for mobility group. And I believe that's pretty much all you need to do on the GUI. Pretty straightforward. A lot less option than the command line, obviously, because of this RF parameter optimization. Click Next. Make sure you review and make sure it looks correct. And click Apply. Now we get a little message prompt here as the system will reboot after these settings are applied. Click OK, pretty much to proceed. Now the system will go ahead and apply those settings for you. Just wait until those are done, and we will see in a second that the controller will go into the reboot. I will be observing that through the command line that we have open over here. And there you go. The controller goes into reboot. You can see there's some housekeeping cleanup before the reboot. Here we got save configuration, restore WebAuth certificate, cleaning up the HCP server, and cleaning up the provisioning SSID, just like how we saw that on the controller number 1. So now we're just going to have to wait for the controller to boot up fully. What we're going to do here is just going to kind of pause the video real quick instead of having you guys kind of sit through that boot up process, and we'll return once the controller is back up. Alright, so we're now back on the controller login prompt. Make sure you can log in using the credential that you provided during the setup, which we can. Then let's go back on to the browser and trying to bring up our controller number 2. Same thing, add exception, log in, do not remember password. See, the IP is 33.104. Same thing here, we have an AP connected to port 3. Looks like it hasn't really registered just quite yet, so we're going to have to give it a couple more seconds here. But while we're waiting for that, what I want to show you is some of the settings that's been applied to the controller and compare that to our setup on the controller one. So one thing that's easy to spot, if you go under wireless and under the radio configuration, for example, specifically under the BGN radio, and look under the network, you can see that on our controller number 2, some of the lower data rates has been disabled right off the bat. So 1, 2, 5.5, 6 megs, and even 11 megs are disabled. So when you have the 11 meg disabled, this means that the system no longer supports 802.11b, so just be a little careful about that. If you still have the legacy devices that you need to support 11b, then you need to make sure you come in here and correct that. But just for the sake of comparison, if we go back to the controller one and go under the same setup menu page, and you can see how the data rates are all enabled by default. If you were to go through the setup with the CLI, what it's telling us is there's a bunch of best practices settings that's been applied as part of that radio optimization switch that we turned on, and the data rate is definitely a good example to show you here. All right. There you go. So just a couple seconds after that, then we can see that the access point that we have connected has successfully registered, and it has grabbed the IP 33.241, and we actually have the DHCP scope set up just like before with VLAN 32. There you go, VLAN 33 set up on the switch to provide the IP address on the APs that directly connected to our controller, which uses the management interface VLAN 33. Alright, so before we move on, just as a side note, the GUI config wizard, specifically on the wires, actually supported now on both 5508 and 2500 series controller, and this is with the version 8.1, with the 2500 series being supported actually even earlier than that. I believe it's starting more like a version 7.6 and then obviously 8.0. And then we also pointed out that 2500 series applies the best practices and optimization, which has it built in as opposed to the 5508 that doesn't have that. Okay, then that might change. And if you refer to the documentations on the 5500 controllers, you will see these features right here sometimes are referred to as the WLAN Express Setup for wired, right? So now that we have this set, we're going to move on to the method number 3, which is pretty much the same thing with the WLAN Express Setup, but this time instead of being directly connected on the wire to the controller, we're going to provision it over wireless. So what we're going to do now is to factory reset our controller 1, just to clear out the config again. Just quickly show you under the commands, if you want to factory reset, there's a menu right here, reset to factory default. Click reset, wait until it's done with the resetting the controller. You can see it's still spinning right now, so give it a couple seconds. Okay, so once it stops spinning, we kind of know it's done, even though it doesn't really tell you here. Then we have to manually reboot it. Just make sure you select reboot without save. Okay. So once again, we're going to have to wait for our controller to come back up, and at the same time we're going to have to switch over the console from our controller 2 back to controller 1 as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video one more time, and we'll be right back. Alright, so we're back to the controller. Prompt for terminate auto install. That means that factory reset has been completed, and now we're ready to move on and try the method number 3, which is the WLAN Express Setup over wireless. Okay, just want to brief mention here this particular features currently as of version or starting version 8.0 is only available on the 2500 series controller and not the other model. And this could be because it requires the access point to be directly plugged into the controller, which is what we have here. And just to be clear here, since we've been kind of switching back and forth between our two setups, we are now back to our setup on the left, which is a controller number 1. And once again, our AP is still directly connected to port 3, and that is pretty much the requirement for this particular feature to work. Alright, so once the controller is booted up and your AP is connected directly to the controller, you have to give it a couple minutes for the AP to register and start the Ssid Broadcast. So you can see right here, enabling provisioning SSID, Cisco Air Provision, and they will drop the user or the traffic to that same management VLANs with the DHCP pool setup. So on the right hand side, back to our setup PC. We're just going to use the same PC here since it has the wireless adapter equipped. Looking at the list of SSID, it looks like it grabbed it already. It could be because that I have that remember from the previous testing. So let me kind of get rid of that real quick. So manage wireless network right there. It looks like it remembers all that. So let me Takes this opportunity to clear them all. Again, that came from when I prepped the lab earlier. So here, Cisco Air provision, you can see it's secure with the WPA2 PSK. And then once you click connect, the security key is just password. Okay, so just type in password and you should be able to connect to that SSID. And hopefully we get the 192.168.1.x IP as well, which we did, .4. And now if you're trying to hit the 192.168.1.1 one more time, you can see that we're back to our pretty much the same setup page as we saw earlier when we do the over the wired. So let's, since we've gone through this once already, let me go through this quickly so we can get our controller 1 back up and running. Start LM-WLC1 US times good NTP 0.10 32.104/24 and 32.1 for a default gateway. Management ID is 32. Click next. Employee, let's do temp-WLC1. WPA2 personal, let's do Cisco 123 in uppercase C. Management VLAN, that's fine. We'll drop the user to management VLAN and click next. Switch on the RF parameter optimization. Typical data, same virtual IP, and we want to match the mobility group name, so MG, LM-MG. Next, review, and click apply. Okay, so pretty straightforward. And you can see that once you've done this one, it's pretty simple. And now that we have both of our controller kind of initialized with the basic setup, and also leveraging the RF parameter optimization, which we'll review fully as far as what has been actually included under those optimization in the future videos. So for the rest of our video series, we're going to be pretty much using these two controllers for our configuration. But I also want to make a quick note just in case that the controls you have is not 2500 series. There's certainly some platform limitations that is laid out on the release notes. So let me bring up the release notes right here for the software version we're running, 8.1.102. There's a section which is something that you definitely wants to check out if you have not, so you can understand the limitation of the platform that you have. For us is 2504 controller. As you can see here, feature not supported. So some of the features that we will not be able to test or implement it on this particular platforms are things like Bonjour Gateway, AVC on Flex Connect, bandwidth contract. Obviously the controller 2504 does not have service port, so that's not applicable. AppleTalk bridging, right to use licensing, PMIPv6, stateful failover, and multicast to unicast. And then it's also said any other features that's not support on the Wisdom 2 and the 5500 are also not supported on the 2500. So now that we've gone through all three types of methods of setup, you can kind of pick and choose the one that you see the most appropriate for your needs or requirements, or especially the platform and the software version you're running as well. So the CLI is always supported. All you need is just the console to the controller and just step through the command line. But obviously you won't be getting all the RF optimization that we saw specifically on the 2504 controller. So that takes you to the GUI setup, which is currently supported on the 5508 as well as the 2504 as our version 8.1. Even though on the 5508 you might not get all the optimization, but just watch out for the later release from Cisco, because Cisco is trying to make this process as easy as possible for us. So hopefully the optimization will get rolled into other platform as well, and that way It becomes more attractive to use the GUI instead of command lines to get all the best practices right off the bat. Okay, and last thing to emphasize in the wireless, GUI over wireless is only currently supported on the 2504 controllers. It's probably just for the convenience, so you don't have to be right next to the controller, but you still need to be in the vicinity of the wireless coverage, so you might as well just walk up to the controller and plug in directly. That way you don't have to worry about having the APs and then the AP needs to directly connect to the controller. And that's pretty much wraps up our videos on Wireless LAN Controller basic installation. You can visit our website to view an extensive list of our lab videos and sign up to get access to additional lab contents. Thank you for watching LabMinutes.com, and I'll see you guys in the next videos.